The More of Us podcast features real, uncut conversations about life, pastoral ministry, and walking with Jesus. All guests are pastors in the Charis Fellowship, bound by our common commitment to biblical truth, relationship, and mission. We trust as you hear more of us, you'll see Christ among us. Well, this is the More of Us podcast. We are in our third season. I am in the studio here at Grace Theological Seminary, and on the other line with me is Beau Stanley. Hi, Beau.
Hey, Tim, how are you?
I'm doing well. It's good to talk with you.
You as well. You as well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's so great. Well, Beau has been a senior pastor at Eastside Grace since 2018. Prior to that, he served for 11 years at Grace Polaris Church, which was one of the first churches I went to as a kid, by the way. And for 4 years, he was in the financial industry. He's married to Stacy. They have 2 children, Isaiah, whom he says can already beat Beau in a foot race, and Simon, the happiest tough guy Beau knows. And I don't know how long ago those were written, Beau, so those might be even more true today when this bio first came out.
Wow, yeah. I mean, Isaiah now has surpassed me in bench press. So that is, that might come up later in our talk because, wow,
It's funny, we put these bios out there, and then 2 or 3 years might transpire, and anything that we said about our kids who grow much faster than we do, becomes like their stories change pretty rapidly.
oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But I'm guessing these things are still true. You and Stacy enjoy traveling, fitness, the occasional card game of gin. I'm assuming that's gin rummy, and you love to play golf. You are the most diehard novice surfer in Pataskala, Ohio. That's got to be a joke. And you hold an M.Div from Phoenix Seminary and a BS in commerce from the University of Virginia. You're from Ohio, so you're a Buckeyes fan. You're a Cleveland fan, and I don't see the Cavaliers up here though. Are you a Cavs fan for basketball?
Yeah, yeah, certainly, especially in the last few years, Simon, my youngest son, has really been a little bit more into the NBA, and so we've been following the Cavs a little bit more closely. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they're fun to watch right now. Their team's clicking. Oh man, that's great. What you mentioned your kids doing sports, maybe in school or something like that. What are their ages? What are the ages of the boys?
Isaiah's a junior, so he's 17, and Simon is a freshman. He's 15, and yeah,
I'm a track nerd. I was a former track coach. What does he run? Just for my
he's a
curiosity.
sprinter. Yeah, he's a sprinter. So though the team he's with is actually a club team that's run through FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes.
Okay.
So they have a track and cross country team that are kind of connected, and they really encourage all their track athletes to run cross country as well, which he has done. So he's really excelled in cross country, but would say probably more drawn to sprinting, particularly the 200, and maybe a little bit more of the 400 this year.
Cross country are young men after my own heart.
There you go.
We always got mad at the sprinters because their practice was over, like as we were done with our warm up, the distance
Uh-huh.
runners. But
Well, there's something to be admired about people who willingly engage in something that other people would consider like a punishment. So,
yes,
you know,
yeah, it's a badge of honor for runners, especially distance runners. I know you've done CrossFit, and I don't know that you're still doing it, but when you did that regularly, what was the lure for you?
that is a good question, Tim. You know, eh, CrossFitters tend to have a sort of in, intense personalities often, and the intensity of CrossFit tends to work with the intensity of the personalities of those who participate in it. That was absolutely true of me. Right now, I'm doing a more uh, a real basic strength training format, so not as much of the uh, what in CrossFit we would call metcons, the high intensity stuff. I really got into CrossFit the opposite way that some do. I suppose I was working out at the Y and doing a pretty typical uh, split routine, uh, various muscle groups on different days. And the Columbus Weightlifting Club, which is the Olympic Weightlifting Club of Columbus, Ohio, just happened to have their home base right there in the North Y of Columbus where I was. And I would watch them doing these lifts. This is the clean and jerk and the snatch. And one of the athletes there actually was an Olympian, Holly Mangold. And so they're, you know, working at a very, very high level and very, very technically proficient. I was fascinated by the Olympic lifts. And as they actually would allow folks to come in and be coached for free if you just kind of worked into their rotation. So I did that and really enjoyed it, but I found that I also wanted to have some cardiovascular components to my training. So I was talking there and found out that CrossFit was actually an approach to training that utilized the Olympic lifts, but also you did so within a context of some really intense cardiovascular exercise as well. So that's when I started to explore it. And for a while, I was basically following the exercises on CrossFit.com, either in just in a gym by myself or with a friend, and then ultimately became part of the CrossFit gym that was located about 200 yards from my office. So that sure didn't hurt.
Yeah, that's what I remember when we had, board meetings at your office when you were at Grace Polaris, and, the CrossFit place was just next door, and you were building relationships over there too, so I think that's one of the things I've heard about CrossFit. So you're talking about the more technical side of things and the training methods, and I've also heard on the relational side, it's like every CrossFit exercise you do is a bonding experience because it's maybe the hardest exercise or a workout you've ever done.
It's wonderful. I mean, that's absolutely true, and there really is a sense of community that builds, if for no other reason than the mutual suffering. But you have you because of the way that the exercises are formatted and the classes are formatted, you'll have a program start and it might last an hour. So everybody's starting at the same time, everybody's finishing at the same time in that particular group, and then people hang out afterward and chat. And it was really a wonderful opportunity to build relationships and have some spiritual conversations. I ended up one of the highlights, I suppose, was having the privilege to perform the wedding for two folks, actually two different couples who were part of that CrossFit gym. So that was a huge blessing, and also something that really drew me to CrossFit.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's your kids' sports or working out at the Y or something like this with CrossFit, it's so important for us as pastors to be out in the community and rubbing shoulders with people who aren't part of our churches. Those are ways we build relational networks and can share Jesus. So it's a very cool thing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So you and Stacy, how long have you been married, and then what are some household responsibilities that you two divide?
Well, we've been married for 23 years, so got married in July of 2001 on Bastille Day.
Okay.
Which we didn't even. It's not like we picked the date because of that, but we
Which one's Bastille Day? Because I was married in July 2001 also.
July 14th.
Okay, you're a week ahead of me. Anyway,
Crazy.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, just 1 week separates our weddings there. So that there you go. We have you had mentioned like responsibilities. So the way responsibilities work around our home is that um, Stacy does most of them, and I kind of occasionally make myself useful, and I kid somewhat about that, but really, she's she's wonderfully she's very diligent, and she's she's very dedicated to making our home a wonderful place. We've kind of said the in terms of tasks, the things and areas of responsibility inside the home, she kind of runs point on, and outside the home, I do to some extent. I will get a little bit more involved in some of the fix it stuff, than she, but my schedule is such that it's difficult to dedicate a ton of time to um, the projects around the house. And honestly, 90% of the time, she's keeping things running, you know, so wonderfully well. And if occasionally I can, you know, change out a light socket or something like that, that's that's great.
I think I've heard if you hold the light bulb and then spin around a lot, it can go back. That's how you get the light bulb in. Is that how you do it?
It will
You're
it will work. It will work. Yeah. You probably will avoid electrocuting yourself too if you do it that way.
So you've married up. I mean, she's running things around there, huh?
She is an amazing wife. And I told our congregation a couple weeks ago, they don't know this, but she's a better pastor's wife than I am the pastor,
Mm.
which is it's just so interesting how God works. I say sometimes that I pulled this great bait and switch when I married her, having just come out of a role in investment banking, and I ended up as a pastor. And so the income potential for the two jobs is a little different, but she has, she's been, she's just been such a wonderful companion. And as I have stepped into the pastoral arena, which was not something I had anticipated either, she has embraced both being, a pastor's wife and also pursuing vocationally some of what she's doing, which is she does work outside the home. She's involved in admissions and uh, tuition receipts for the Christian school that we are connected with. So yeah, so she's a very very capable woman.
That's great. You mentioned your time in the financial sector. I'd actually just like let's dive into career stuff and vocation and calling. What was that transition from the financial sector to pastoral ministry like for you? Like, how did you know it was time to go?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, I was in the financial sector not because of a great passion for finance or business or something like that, but because when I had been in college, I knew that a degree in business would be a pretty marketable major. And so for 4 years, essentially out of college, I had a role in investment banking, and then came back to Columbus and was involved in a private wealth management firm as the director of investments. So I did a lot of with that job. I did a lot of allocating. Let's say if you had a 401k, I would help to allocate your assets in the best funds possible, and was looking at a lot of things like that. But as I was doing that job, I began to take at Grace Polaris a course which was in its first year, which was just simply called leadership training.
Okay.
And it was an intensive 10-month course designed for lay people with a heavy theological component. It was I don't know that I would have known to call it this at the time, but it was a systematic theology rubric, so to speak. We would go through the traditional categories, bibliology, theology proper, Christology, and so forth,
Yeah.
one per month. And then we were actually doing the teaching. So we had to prepare to teach on the topics we had been learning about. And then we were through that program mentored by someone who was most of the mentors were on staff with Grace Polaris. And as I was doing that course and really enjoying it and thriving, people started to see that I I had gifts in this area. I I seemed to resonate with it, and I wondered to myself, I wonder if maybe God isn't directing me more toward a career change. And at that time, I really was thinking more the academic route. So I felt the Lord was calling me to go to seminary, and was thinking really of possibly becoming a professor of biblical languages or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I did. We did. We had just purchased a house 6 months earlier. We put it on the market. I took off to go to Deerfield, Illinois, and study summer Greek. And Stacy stayed back and helped get the house ready for sale. And then did 2 years of my M.Div credits there at Trinity,
Okay.
and then transferred to Phoenix Seminary, which, not so surprisingly, is in Phoenix, but it was a transition that actually Wayne Grudem
Yeah.
had made not too long before I had. So ironically, I never ended up having a class with Dr. Grudem, but he was in on my oral exam, which was required for graduation. And man, um, I guess that's a little intimidating to have him in there, but it worked out. I graduated.
The author of, like, one of the key systematic theology textbooks, yeah, that would be a
Oh,
little
yeah.
intimidating.
Yeah, but yeah, it worked out okay. And he's a very friendly man, and yeah, very gracious. So, but that was kind of how that came about. And strangely, as God would have it, the as I was closing out my time at Phoenix Seminary, there Dr. David Plaster, who was the academic dean at Grace Seminary at the time, he was making an accreditation visit to Phoenix Seminary because Phoenix Seminary and Grace are in the same district of the Higher Learning Commission for some reason.
Okay.
So he joked that he was the token evangelical on the accreditation team, and they came out and were evaluating the school for. We already had accreditation, I think, with the Association of Theological Schools, and this was to gain accreditation with the Higher Learning Commission. And I heard that Pastor Dave was coming out, who I didn't know at that time, but he had just taken the role of senior pastor at Grace Polaris.
Okay.
So he is not serving in that role yet, but he had just been hired for that role. So as he came out and visited, we had lunch there, and that ultimately ended up in him really creating a position for me at Grace Polaris that hadn't existed previously. And it was a sort of it, I'm really glad that ultimately he invited me into that pastoral role, because I do think um it's really a wonderful fit, more so than being a professor would have been. And Pastor Dave had the foresight and wisdom to give me, in my job description, a variety of roles. So I was in I did various things because I had no pastoral experience, and it almost was a bit like an internship in that way.
Yeah.
And it was it that was my start at Grace Polaris.
Okay. So let me, if you don't mind, I'd love to summarize a couple things because for people who are listening, this is interesting. Just seeing this arc, your church provided a theological education and leadership training track for you that stirred a passion that you didn't realize was there. And
Yep.
that's an insight for any of us listening. Like, are we providing those kind of training experiences? I'm pretty sure that Grace Polaris is still doing that because I was talking to someone last year who's currently in that in that class.
Yes.
So,
Yes, they absolutely are. And as as the Lord would have it, I ended up in my role at Grace Polaris eventually being one of the point people for that class. So yeah, it's still going.
okay.
And yeah.
So, yeah, so that's like the first insight I want to just pause on and say, like, hey, pastors listening to this, church leaders listening to this, pay attention to the kind of training tracks that you have for people. You never know what God's going to do in someone's life. Second insight that I saw in there, and this accords with my experience too, this love for theology and this maybe desire to teach it. Sometimes we think the academy is the best place to do it or most natural place to do it. And maybe if Trent was sitting here with me, my co-host, I would pause and not say this, but I had a professor tell me something maybe similar to what you heard from Dr. Plaster. He said, if you really love to teach, you don't want to go to a Bible college or seminary because a third of your time is grading papers and a third of your time is in meetings. Only a third of your time is in actual teaching. But in the local church, he said, teaching opportunities are abundant. And that
Mm.
was really, really helpful for me. So it sounds like that actually was something true for you too. You found the local church was a place where you got to teach more than you expected. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. That I have wonderful teaching opportunities and outlets for that gift. And one thing I so appreciate about being a pastor and serving in local church ministry, which, by the way, Dr. Grudem really, even in a brief conversation that we had, would have said very much the same thing, that that local church, he as a longtime academic was speaking of the real impact that a person could have through the local church ministry. And um, not only do I have ample opportunities to engage the theological side, the academic side, but I get to be a practitioner. So I get to learn. I get to I don't know if theorize is exactly the right word, but I get to think deeply, but then apply that in the most down to earth, important situations in people's lives. It's such a wonderful juxtaposition of the theoretical and the practical, and it's just such a joy. That is such a joy in my role.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That is a good insight because sometimes we can lean too far to the side of just teaching academically, and sometimes even in our preaching, I feel every once in a while like I just gave a sermon. I just gave a commentary on a passage, not a proclamation of
Mm.
truth that could translate to everyday life. Like that's just my bent. I love information and sharing it, but people need information that transforms. And so you need the theology, you need the practice. And yeah, one other thing I'll say here, Beau, before I ask you about your title then that you got at Grace Polaris is I'll just say I've seen that in you, this scholarly side. It's why I've appreciated your ability to write on Charis Symposium with some of your papers, but those papers aren't just theoretical. I think they're things you practice. So I've also seen the practical side, and it's great that God's given you the blend of gifts there, not just for your church, but for our fellowship of churches. It's a gift to have.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So your title at Grace Polaris, I maybe you had multiple titles, but what were some of those? What did you eventually settle into there?
My title eventually became Pastor of Training and Spiritual Growth.
Okay.
So this was the second phase of my time at Grace Polaris. After Pastor Dave passed away and went to be with Christ, Mike Yoder was selected as our new pastor. And Pastor Mike saw some things in me I don't know that I even saw in myself, and placed me in a role that involved both teaching, overseeing other teachers, ABFs, training opportunities. I actually did some blogging that was part of, I don't know if you call it thought leadership in the realm of training and discipleship. But he also placed me on a small group called the Senior Leadership Team. And that enabled me to see close up and personal some of the inner workings of a large church at at a senior level, and I got to watch and contribute, but I wasn't the guy ultimately on the hook for many of the decisions and all that. So that was really helpful when I ultimately did step into a senior pastor role, and I'm very grateful to Mike for that and so many other things. He's been an incredible influence on me, and um, just yeah, that was really that was really a wonderful opportunity that ultimately helped me in the role that I'm now in as well.
That's great. And then how did you know you're at Eastside now, you've been there since 2018. How did you know it's time to look for that next role?
I didn't.
Okay. Well, that's the story then.
Yeah, yeah. So when I had been contacted by some churches who were conducting searches for lead pastors, senior pastors, and didn't really feel compelled to respond. I really didn't even interview for any of those roles. This was very content doing what I was doing where I was. I had been saved at Grace Polaris. My entire family, through the ministry of Grace Polaris, had been saved there. So to be a pastor in the church that was, for all intents and purposes, our home church was a great privilege, and I felt very comfortable and rooted there. So when Eastside was conducting a senior pastor search and Pastor Chip was retiring, initially, someone on staff with Grace Polaris had had a connection to the search team and asked me, "Hey, would you be interested in looking at this role?" And I said, "No, um, not really." And again, it was the same sort of thinking as before.
Yeah.
I was quite content. I was happy and um, you know pleased to be doing what I was doing and not desiring to move. And as I began to uh, think through things a little bit more, I I started to think about East Side situation, and this is going to sound a little strange, but I had this thought that you know I'd love to see them stay in the fellowship. I didn't know who they'd be looking at in terms of pastors, and knowing that depending on who that new pastor would be, that could mean stronger or lesser ties with the fellowship. I knew it was a good church from afar, and I had this sense that maybe this is what God has prepared me for. Maybe God has given me uh, some some skills and experience to 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 benefit the church in this way, and that I guess that local church, but also the church in general. And I started to think, well, that all makes sense. The reason maybe I wouldn't look at taking a role like that is it would be more difficult.
Hmm.
And I thought, well, that's not a very good reason. More and more, I became comfortable with this idea that no, this is a role that God is calling me to, and so that's really how my starting at Eastside came about and the senior pastoral. And guess what? It turned out it is more difficult,
Hmm.
but God has been gracious, and that's been part of my own spiritual growth as well. Huge part of my spiritual growth is the growth that has been required to lead and shepherd from this particular seat.
Can you even tell us a little bit more about that? Because
Mhm.
a lot of the listeners would be pastors, and there's something about hearing other people work through the difficulty that can be helpful. And first, like, oh, I'm not alone. And second, oh, God sustains us. Here's one way that He did for, fill in the blank. It's Beau right now.
So, of course, when you're not in the senior pastor role, you realize that to take that senior pastor role is going to be a significant step in terms of responsibility. And to walk into that responsibility, knowing that there are going to be challenges, knowing that, what the difficulties you've had in ministry, in your own spiritual growth are going to be magnified in that role, it can be intimidating. And for me, a theme that I'm beginning to see in my own leadership is that one of the challenges for me has been embracing that spiritual uh, leadership, authority. being willing to say, yeah, God has placed me in this role. I am responsible for this, and I have to make this decision. It's difficult, and to step into that additional responsibility is part of, for me, that has been part of the growth process spiritually. I've struggled, and we may get into this later, but I've struggled with OCD since I was really young, and you can imagine there are some things that engage a person if that's the way you're wired, if that's your processes of thinking. There are some things that come up in pastoral role that can that can really challenge that. And
Yeah, actually, let's just go there now because we're talking about it, and this is a perfect time to talk about that. You said you struggled with it since you were young. Did you have a name for that? Did you know what your struggle was when you were young?
I knew pretty early because I was doing like some things that were, I think my folks were like, what's going on here? I would I would like obsess about how well I had cleaned my room. And I remember like alphabetizing my collection of LPs.
Mm,
This was like vinyl before it was cool. And I remember I would like play with my hamsters for hours at a time because I felt like if I didn't do that, I hadn't, you know, done my job or something like that. I started even with some of the more classic OCD type stuff. I would look at electrical wires and maybe imagine that I had seen a cut in the wire and that something that the wire was going to catch fire and burn the house down, and it would be my fault because I didn't tell somebody about it. So early on, they took me to a social worker who was able, th- they that's the name they gave to that OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And so early on, I knew at some level what I was dealing with, but my understanding of obsessive thinking and how that intersects with spiritual health and reliance on Christ has multiplied over the years. My understanding has become much more developed and mature. Not that things are easier. In some ways, they're just as difficult because the challenges get greater. But
yeah. So, what you described as a kid, it sounds like there was fear that something could always go wrong that leads to hypervigilance because you're responsible in some way or another. Are those
Mhm.
three things that you think on some level you were thinking, and when OCD shows up, that's still kind of there's fear, there's hypervigilance, there's a intense sense of responsibility.
Yep, yep,
Okay. So you said as you've grown and become more spiritually mature, you've learned how to um I don't want to I don't know what the right word is to cope, to manage, to work with your OCD. So you would still say that OCD tendencies show up in your life.
yes,
What are
yeah.
so what's that look like now at a more mature level? And then how does that show up in pastoral ministry?
Sometimes what will happen is I will be thinking about something like the sermon, and it would be really difficult to switch gears. So I'm not sure how this point is going to get resolved, or I don't know how to synthesize these ideas. And it's real difficult for me to lay that down for now and move on. That's kind of a simple thing.
Okay.
But there might be something about maybe a meeting that's coming up that I anticipate is going to be difficult, or something that causes a sense of fear in me. And the tendency that I will have is to mentally think through that or try to analyze that, and sometimes really get stuck in gear with that.
That's maybe a key word for it would be stuck.
Yep.
Okay. So this inability to let go of it, it's hard to get unstuck with some of these. Do you end up rehearsing conversations before you have them?
I sometimes I've done that, but many times it could be, yeah, the the common theme is the rehearsing and the working over and over and over through certain thoughts in my mind. And, I know more now about kind of what that is, where at some level I'm trying in my mind to bring a sense of calm or lessen the anxiety through that analysis. And that analysis will often continue far past the point of being useful. So that's been part of what I've learned and am learning. And this is where it intersects with spiritual growth for me, is there really is at some level a a desire for control
Mhm.
over things that, at least at that moment, the Lord has not given me control over. And so there are some real practical things that a person can do to help calm anxiety in moments like that. There's also a spiritual battle going on to be able to say, God is my refuge, God is my fortress. God has called me right now to release this to Him and to turn my attention to something that is going to just, where I'm seeking first His kingdom right now in this moment, and entrusting Him with the what ifs.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like too, this is very much forward thinking. It's less like looking back on what's happened and reviewing it ad nauseum, but it's like all of the potentials, but because you want control. And
I would say it's both.
okay.
There's looking back, there's to make sure I've done something right. There's looking forward to control the what if scenario, or to at least think through the what if scenario enough to assuage a fear at the moment.
Yeah. And you use the word anxiety a couple times. So what have you found are the intersections between OCD and anxiety?
Really, there's a lot. Anxiety, OCD is considered an anxiety disorder,
Okay.
and the label of anxiety in my mind, and I have no technical expertise on this, but it really refers to that sense of unease or uh, fear or discomfort. And the label OCD really has to do with the pattern of thinking. So the way it works, in essence, not to get too clinical, but the way it works is that there's a thought that is distressing, and in order to alleviate that distress or anxiety in my brain and my mind, I'm wanting to create, through analysis of some kind, a to yeah, to minimize that anxiety somewhat. And that's what happens, is the brain tends to get stuck in gear, and unfortunately, because of neuroplasticity and the way brain circuits work, the more you are stuck in that gear, the more deeply entrenched that neural pathway gets. So even at a physiological level, it's really destructive to be stuck like that.
Yeah. So at our church, we've had a anxiety support group that's been meeting for probably since 2020. I think they maybe started during the COVID year. And they talk a lot about their brain neuroplasticity, and they talk about anxiety and the ups and downs of their weeks. And they also talk about some different coping skills through it. So some of what you're describing here is actually resonating really well with what I know they've discussed in that group. And my wife, who struggles with anxiety, has talked about. But I really appreciate that putting OCD within the family of anxiety disorders, and then it's a way of trying to manage the anxiety through analysis. That's,
Mhm.
if I'm understanding you correctly, that's like a really helpful way to visualize or think through what's going on. And
Yes.
okay.
I think it's true that for folks who deal with OCD, many of them you see a hyper analytical way of thinking. And so even in a pastoral role, one of the real practical effects of that is I have to be vigilant about not being hyper analytical. Sometimes my my sister-in-law got me a shirt. She was into this whole birth order thing and the differences that come about because of that. And I am a firstborn. So the shirt said, I think too much. I'm the firstborn. And it was really true. So I'm much more likely to overthink something than to underthink it.
Yeah. You told me that, I don't know if you're currently going through this or this is still in the near future, but you're doing a series at your church on mental health, and, I'm wondering as you're working through that sermon series, um, how's that going? What are you hoping to share? What have you shared?
We are indeed doing a mental health series. It will start right after Easter.
Okay.
The hope is that if folks come to our church who are newer, the topic of mental health is likely to be something on their minds. It's a hot topic, obviously. It's a topic of personal interest. And I, when I'm thinking about mental health, I'm thinking about spiritual growth.
Hmm,
So, really, my hope in the series is to present a framework for understanding mental health that moves people towards spiritual growth, particularly toward Jesus Christ. And this is something intriguing to me, and I think very important that when we deal with mental health, that as people who you know either are suffering or people who are giving counsel to those who are suffering, it's important that our counsel be fundamentally Christ centered. So I've done a lot of thinking about what that actually means. But for me, the series is an opportunity to learn and to be able to articulate that. And I've appreciated you gave some great book suggestions looking into that. I've recently started in on and read most of Curtis Chang's Anxiety Opportunity
oh, yeah. Yeah.
and found it excellent.
Yeah.
He deals with both the some of the things that are common coping mechanisms, and he also deals with really some of the worldview issues that are at play. And it's been really good. And I really do hope with it's just a 4-week series, but I really do hope to be able to present some principles that really distinguish a Christ-centered approach to mental health from advice that one might get from a secular source, which might be good to a certain point, but that's that's not that's not what this series is about fundamentally. This series is about a Christ-centered approach to the topic.
I appreciate that, Beau. It's like we can look elsewhere to resolve the symptoms, but if we want something more than resolving or limiting the symptoms, if we want a lasting hope, if we want a greater sense of security, maybe a helpful way to understand the past and the future, those are all found in Jesus, and spiritual growth should be the goal, not just resolving symptoms. So, and that's a good thing to do. It's helpful to help people alleviate their suffering, and I like the way that you framed it that way. But yeah, the growth is the goal, and that's a great way to frame it. I look forward to
Well,
listening to those when they're done.
yeah, well, I'm looking forward to hearing how it turns out. It's a daunting task, but
Yeah, try not to get too stuck as you prep, right? I mean,
well,
that's
there you
right.
go. It's like I don't want to overanalyze something that's about overanalysis.
That's right. Well, let me talk to you about your spiritual growth. I mean, we're talking about helping other people grow spiritually, but we want to be healthy spiritual leaders as well. So what are some key habits in your spiritual growth?
The daily habit that I have takes place in the morning. I am I like routine a lot. At a certain time in the morning, I spend what usually amounts to about 22 minutes. You say about, so yeah, about 22 minutes. And I usually will, uh, I will do a short invocation, and I have 7 of them, one for each particular day.
Have you written
And
them
then
yourself?
well, they're biblical, so just a verse, and I got those verses from the book Prayer by Timothy Keller.
Okay, great.
In fact, the model I use is is his really, though any approach that, any biblically based prayer approach, particularly with an evangelicalism, would probably seem a little bit similar. I look at the passage, I usually read one chapter. I look at the passage, look for things that it says about God, look for things that it says about people. Maybe are there some commands here? And then try to synthesize it into what is God saying to me as like the main idea or the main point for this morning. And then I will pray through that main point and some of the things that the text has revealed. It's great to be able to identify characteristics of God, because then you can praise him for those things. And that's, how I start my prayer. And I'll often, you know, go through a time of confession and humbling myself before the Lord, and then do intercession for others, and for, I pray for myself as well
Yeah.
during that time. And then I would say I've tried to do something like that in the evening, an evening prayer routine, and it's a little hit or miss. But in addition to that, one thing that has been a helpful practice for me, this may sound strange, but preparing sermons has been a component of my time with the Lord, absolutely. And I I've heard different things, pastors, some would say, don't do devotions with the passage that you're preaching on, because you'll start thinking about a sermon. Uh, Others would say, no, it's okay. And I generally don't. I usually read another passage, but then when I'm preparing the sermon, I do often pray through the passage that I'm preaching on. And as I'm praying, before my time of writing, or thinking through illustrations or whatever, that is a time to interact with the Lord. And it's become something that is part of my spiritual, my rhythms with the Lord.
Yeah, that's good. I'm familiar with that debate too. But yeah, I would want the passage to be something that we've prayed through and meditated on before we preach it. What about habits with others that you have?
Yeah. Well, I lead a home group. So Stacy and I host a home group, and that takes place every other week. And on the off weeks, I and a couple of guys from the group get together when the weather was nicer, we were just walking around at a park, and when it's been a little bit, colder, not as easy to get around, we were just meeting over at Tim Hortons, and that group, and building relationships with those guys has been really, really good. A lot of times, um, it'll just be um, the guys who I'm discipling, but in the process, of course, I'm being blessed as well, and they'll read maybe 7 or 8 chapters in the course of 2 weeks, and then we'll catch up on how life is going. We'll talk about what their thoughts were on what they read, and discuss various things that maybe the Lord says through those chapters, and then we pray for one another. So it's that's been really, really a good thing, and a more recent development. But yeah, I've always kind of struggled with, okay, there's all these things that we should do, or people say we should do. So I do think it's important that we be involved in groups with folks that we can be um, transparent with, and smaller groups, and that group has really been a really good thing.
Great. But, I wanna this might sound like I'm circling back to previous conversation about OCD, but I am curious for you individually, and maybe you just touch on something you said before, but how have you learned to, I'm going to borrow someone's phrase, quote, relax in God's love, end quote?
Pretty difficult. Uh, Pretty difficult. My tendency is toward analysis, as I said, and I'm very oriented toward growth and improvement.
Mm,
So the notion of just being with God and receiving His love is not terribly intuitive for me.
mm,
But I believe it's really important, because it seems to me that spiritual growth and serving God has to flow from the gospel. And the gospel starts with the reality, of course, that our sins have separated us from God, but not because of our merit. He has saved us through Christ's death and resurrection. So I would not preach a gospel to someone that says, do X, Y, Z, then God will love you. And in much the same way, I should be comfortable with the idea of, as someone who is in Christ, God God loves you. Full stop.
yeah,
It's just not. It's not been a terribly intuitive thing for me to think in that way. To just rest in God's love, as you said, or to just be with God, and to allow the starting point of my relationship to be His unconditional love. But
yeah.
that's something I'm kind of growing into.
Yeah. Well, you hinted at when you get stuck on something, you have certain prayers that you might, like short prayers that you might pray, like, God, I give this to you, or God, I rest in you. And so I think those are ways that you are probably trying to relax in God's love. It's maybe just
Mm.
using different language for it. But you're right. That isn't intuitive for many of us. A lot of us as pastors are, or church leaders are activists. We're doers. And
Mhm.
to pause, to relax in God's love it's not it's not easy, and it's scary, and it's vulnerable. So I loved your answer. I loved how honest you were about that. So thanks for sharing that. I would love to close out with this prayer. Prayer over you, or prayer over anybody who might get stuck. It's not my prayer. It's the Apostle Paul's. But if you would just receive this right now as a gift, and anyone listening, this is such a powerful prayer. Ephesians 3. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all of the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love surpasses knowledge, that you might be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. I think that's something Jesus would want to say to you today, Beau. He'd want to say it to anybody listening. And just wow, thanks for spending the last hour with us. It's been a great conversation. I appreciate your vulnerability, honesty, insights. It's been wonderful.
It's truly a privilege, Tim, and just really appreciate your friendship. And thank you for having me on.
For sure. I'm glad we could do this. And yeah, I appreciate your friendship too. It's been great to know you over the years. Well, this is Tim Sprankle from Leesburg Grace Church without my co host, Dr. Trent Lambert from Grace Theological Seminary's Center for Thriving Leaders. We are thankful that you listened to this conversation with Beau Stanley. Reminder that the More of Us podcast recognizes we're not alone. We lead best when we walk with others. We hope you join us for more of these talks by subscribing today. And remember, God loves you. Relax in that.